From the library of the New York Stock Exchange at the corner of Wall and Broad Streets in New York City, you're inside the Ice House, our podcast from Intercontinental Exchange on markets, leadership, and vision in global business. The dream drivers that have made the NYSE an indispensable institution of global growth for over 225 years. Each week, we feature stories of those who hatch plans, create jobs, and harness the engine of capitalism. Right here, right now at the NYSE and at ICE's exchanges and clearinghouses around the world. And now welcome inside the Ice House. Here's your host, Josh King of Intercontinental Exchange.
Listeners to this podcast know that I find the science and art of packaging to be a fascinating aspect of the marketing and branding of products. In the times that we've taken on the topic, I noticed that the conversation around it has shifted as packaging has been brought to the front lines in the battle to reduce a company's carbon footprint and aid in sustainability efforts across industries. For example, back in episode 335, we heard from Kimberly-Clark's Chief R&D Officer, Robert Long, on the decades of research that he and his team have put into creating the perfect, sustainable, light yet durable wrapper for each of the company's hundreds of unique products. And just a couple episodes ago, I talked to Jean Jardisset about Ambev's ambitious goal to become carbon neutral, an endeavor that would be impossible, to quote him, if we cannot get right the packaging side, we will not be able to have zero emissions on the Scope 3. Our guest today, graphic packaging CEO Michael Doss, is quite familiar with Ambev and their packaging needs, as the Brazilian beverage giant is one of the customers who depend on graphic packaging's products to reduce emissions and increase recycling. The secret weapon to reducing the use of fossil fuel-dependent plastics, creating a more recyclable economy, and keeping our cold drinks icy is the humble paper fiber. According to Ohio State, the first cardboard was created in the 1600s in China, but it wasn't until 1817 that the first cardboard boxes were introduced for shipping and transporting goods large and small. To paraphrase the New York Stock Exchange's Vice Chairman John Tuttle, more has changed in the industry of fiber-based packaging in the last 20 years than the preceding 200. Our conversation with graphic packaging CEO Michael Doss on innovation in fiber-based consumer packaging solutions and the ESG of paper products, it's all coming up right after this.
Shopify Editions is back with over 100 product updates and enhancements all in one place. Explore our latest solutions for every aspect of commerce, from starting and scaling a business
so you can sell everywhere easier,
to flexible components for enterprise needs.
Businesses can choose which technologies they need to create the customer experience they want.
And developer tooling to customize any commerce experience.
We know how important it is to offer the right mix of power, flexibility, and customization across our surfaces.
No matter what you're building, you can build for the long term with Shopify. Visit shopify.com/editions.
Our guest today, Michael Doss, is the president and CEO of Graphic Packaging Holding Company. That's NYSE ticker symbol GPK. Prior to his appointment as CEO in January of 2016, Michael served in a number of senior roles with the company, including COO, Senior Vice President of Consumer Packaging, and VP of Operations. He first joined the company back in 1990. Michael serves on the boards of directors for the American Forest and Paper Association, the Sustainable Forest Initiative, the Paper Recycling Coalition, and the Atlanta Area Council of the Boy Scouts of America. Welcome, Michael, inside the Ice House and to the New York Stock Exchange.
Thanks, and thanks for having me today. Nice to spend some time with you, Josh.
What brings you up to New York this trip?
We had an investor conference yesterday and got to spend some time with some of our investors and talk a little bit about what's going on in the economy, our business, and great to be here at the Exchange this morning.
What are your key memories of coming back to the Exchange, and how is it a place that graphic packaging puts to use?
Well, we've been members since 92, and so it's a long history with the Exchange. And ultimately, we've now done a couple of our investor days here, and just the connection with the facilities, being in the city, having our investors come and be able to spend some time with us and talk about where we're going to take the company over time. A lot of good memories there.
Talking about your discussions with investors, we live streamed your session at Goldman yesterday, which to an average listener was sort of a crash course into the graphic packaging business. I'm sure your investors know how to model every aspect of what you disclose, but for Pete and me, it was sort of like hey, this is A to Z on packaging. Can you explain the three principal substrates that your company produces and how the audience might come across them in their daily consumer use?
Yeah, maybe even taking a step back for a minute for the audience. Graphic Packaging is a company that most people don't know of. They don't know the name. And yet I almost guarantee in the last 24 hours, they've used something that we make. And so we've got the ability in our customer set to reach a variety of consumer goods companies. So whether it was the coffee you had this morning in the cup, the paper cup that we make, or the lunch you had that came in a tray that we make, the frozen dinner for dinner, your afternoon snack, whether it's a soft drink or after hours of beer, all those things are things that we make and put in fiber-based packaging. And there's really, as you alluded to, three principal substrates that we use to do that. Two of them are virgin, meaning they come from virgin trees and pulp, and I'll talk about that a little bit and how it's very circular. And then one of them is recycled. And so we have what we call SBS, or solid bleach sulfate. That's the white paper that is primarily used for cups and direct food contact. And then we have a product called CUK, our trade name SUS, and that's solid bleach sulfate. And so think about the carrier cartons for beer. So anything that has to be really strong. And the handle on a six-pack, you don't want that to break or tear and have the bottles fall on the ground. So you need that strength to do that. And then ultimately, and what we've been investing heavily in is recycling and coated recycled paperboard, or CRB as we call it in the industry, that tends to be used for a variety of packaged goods applications and increasingly more found in consumer circles for the types of products that people want to buy.
I mentioned Ohio State research in the introduction, so I hope that a proud Michigander like yourself can forgive me for bringing that up. What did your dad do for Consumers Energy, and what was life like growing up in the Wolverine State?
Yeah, so my dad worked for the power company his entire career, and we moved around the state of Michigan, I think 10 times. I ultimately went to high school in the northern suburbs of Detroit, Rochester Hills. I went to Rochester Adams High School, and then attended college for both my undergraduate and graduate work at Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo.
Talking about Western Michigan, following your graduation, you then joined this company, Graphic Packaging, as a sales rep. How did your career evolve from marketing and sales to overseeing actually operations like your plant in Gordonville, Tennessee?
It's an interesting story in terms of how I wound up there. So, I didn't go out of college thinking, hey, I'm going to get into packaging. I hadn't thought about it really at all. And that's the beauty of how I wound up where I'm at here. I signed up for 10 interviews halfway through my MBA. I'd done construction work during the summer, never had an internship. And so I knew that this was about to become pretty real when I graduated with my graduate degree there, and I'd ultimately need to find a job. So I said, let's go practice some of these interviews. And so I did 10 of them, as I said, got called back to, I think, 6. And one of them was a company by the name of James River Corporation that had a mill and converting operation in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And I remember walking onto the floor of our converting plant, and I looked at the printing presses, these large printing presses, and they're running all these brand name items. So Kellogg cereals running on 3 of the presses, P&G's running on a couple of them, M&M Mars, Kraft Mac and Cheese is running on them. And I thought to myself, you know what? This is a real company making real things. You better get your head in the game. You may just want to work here. And of course, they invited me back, and the rest is history. But I've spent my entire career now with that firm. We now go by Graphic Packaging. There's been a series of acquisitions over the years that have evolved. But 33 years with the same
Graphic
company.
Packaging is the old James River?
Yeah. We acquired that business over a period of time.
The job that you've done, Mike's also taken you outside the United States, as you made dozens of trips while overseeing the turnaround and growth of the company's European business. When did you first start working internationally, and how has Graphic Packaging's non-U.S. business evolved for your time with the company, mentioning the stuff, for instance, that you do with Ambev?
Yeah, so we always had a large presence in North America. But in 2012, my boss at the time, David Scheibel, who's the CEO of the company, said, Mike, you need to go over to Europe. We've got a small business there. It's underperforming. We either need to sell it or we need to grow it, and you need to come back with a recommendation. So as you alluded to, I made a number of trips, talked to a number of folks. We ultimately found a couple of businesses that we were able to bolt on to our business. And then we did a few more. And then about 2 years ago, we did a very large acquisition. So now we've got a $2.5 billion business in Europe. And those are the two principal markets, Josh, that we compete in and service customers in, is North America and in Europe. And if you think about it, why we like those markets is they're large consumer markets. So people have disposable income, even though they're not growing real fast. The types of products that we make, in fact, manufacture, they have the ability to purchase, and very defensive end-use markets where if you add up, what we do, almost 90% of everything we do somehow touches food or beverage. So very defensive in nature.
I don't know if this is perceptible or describable, but when I compare my experience going into a Hannaford's in the US and looking at the store shelves and going into a Sainsbury's in the UK or a store in France, there's something about packaging in Europe that seems to be tighter, more compact, use less space, a little bit more efficient. Is that something that you have a read on?
It's a good read on your behalf. Ultimately, the European consumer is the most sustainably conscious consumer in the world. In the case of the UK, their shopping habits are different than what we have in the US too, meaning they go to the store pretty much every day or every other day to provision for what they need. The refrigerators are a lot smaller. It's just culturally how they like to feed their families and feed themselves. And so, we have different types of packaging in that kind of environment. And again, that's one of the reasons why it's so important we have a big business in Europe, because the trends for packaging tend to start there 18 to 24 months before they migrate to the rest of the world. So because we've got a big business there and a lot of new product development people, we're able to move those trends around the globe faster to our other operations and take advantage of them.
And those trends are guided by academia, government, design sensibilities. Where does it start that they get an 18-month head start on us?
All those things, but I would point to the end-use consumer has been driving this for the last 5 years for sure, as their push for more sustainable planet really takes hold for these large consumer goods companies. They're advocating to these brands with their purchasing dollars around which brands they're going to support based on how they think they're showing up in the marketplace, much more so than when I started in the industry in 1990. I mean, we had the chasing arrows on every package, meaning that it was 100% recyclable. No one really paid that much of attention to it until about 2017. I think there was a National Geographic, article that came out on, plastics in the oceans. And from that point forward, there's been a lot of focus on this. And it's been an opportunity for us to really drive our new product development around the replacement of single-use plastics with fiber-based packaging.
You mentioned how during the course of a day, we're going to interact with your products from morning to night. And certainly when we go to lunch at the cafeteria and grab a cardboard tray as our takeaway. In 2008, Graphic Packaging began to build out its food service packaging division. What was behind the decision, and how did you develop that arm of the business through organic and M&A growth in those early years?
Yeah, so in 2008, 2009, when the Great Recession really hit, we had a large business, as I mentioned, in North America and a very focused customer set. Our top 25 accounts were close to 70% of all of our volume, which was good from an SG&A standpoint. We could really focus on those customers. But if one of them got a cold, we got the flu. And so during that period of time, we decided we were going to build out our portfolio differently. And so we took a portfolio that was roughly probably 85% focused on just what I'll call center of the store, food and beverage. Today, that number's just barely over 50%. We didn't even really have a food service business in 2008. We had the fortune of being able to acquire International Paper's consumer packaging business in 2018. Now our food service business is roughly 20% of our global revenue, so it's quite large. Last year, we made 13 billion paper cups as an example. And so it's a key part of how we go to market, and it diversifies our product mix, as you can appreciate, because if one part of the economy is down, meaning unemployment is higher, people tend to eat more at home. And if we've got 3.6% unemployment like we do today, ultimately the consumer is more mobile. They want convenience. They want to be able to go through the drive-thrus because they're busy. And our food service business is really on fire right now.
Do the biggest chains like McDonald's and Starbucks sort of do their own manufacturing or in-house or bespoke, or do they come to Graphic Packaging for their needs? And
we work with them. I mean, in some cases they do some stuff on their own, but we just recently announced a new project that we're working on with Chick-fil-A. And that's been a very collaborative effort where they have ideas, we have solutions, and we fine-tune those together to really come up with a unique product that really fits their needs for their beverage platform.
Before we go too far into the future, this year marks your 7th as CEO. You replaced David Scheibel, who you talked about earlier. He served 9 years in the post after spending several years working up the ranks, similar to your trajectory. How did you work together on succession planning, and what was the mandate from the board as you took the helm from David?
I had the fortune to work for David in a variety of roles and the opportunity to watch a very good batter in the batter's box. And he gave me every opportunity to develop my skills. I mentioned he dispatched me to Europe and said, go figure this out. And what he said is, this is how you're going to frame your capabilities to the board ultimately. And I've been lucky in my career. I've had not one, but 3 really great bosses that it gave me these opportunities. I'll liken it a little bit to tossing me in the pool with those little floaty things on your arms. They weren't going to let me drown, but they were going to let me struggle for a little while. And I think that struggle really helps you develop that resolve, to work through tough business problems, because ultimately you have to face those each and every day. Things just don't go according to plan. I mean, you put the best plans together and the only thing you know is that they're wrong. And so you have to be able to do countermeasures and find ways to come back. And that resiliency is really what the board was looking for. So we had a great partnership. And ultimately, that's my responsibility too, is we've got a few people that we're grooming for potential successor for me when that point comes, and I want to give them those same opportunities.
You use an interesting metaphor in that, talking about David as a good batter in the batter's box. And, everyone has a different swing, everyone has a different hitch, different sort of, Nomar Garciaparra playing with his batting gloves. And, it's a totally different aspect of dealing with subordinates and peers versus walking into a room where there are board members around the table. And for a lot of people, getting into that batter's box is a new trick. How did you sort of condition yourself to the way your swing was going to be in that batter's box?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you this, as long as we're using athletic metaphors here, it took me a couple of years for the game to really slow down. So most people talk about it takes a couple of years to go from high school to college to the pros, unless you're a generational player like LeBron James, where you can just make that transition and it's smooth. I'm not that person. And so, it was no different for me, even though I'd watched a great batter and he'd been very successful. Watching the batter and being the batter are two different things. And so I worked through that no different than I think most people that go into that role. But one of the biggest changes you have when you become CEO is, in my case, I've got 9 independent directors, and each one of them is a boss, if you think about it that way. So you go from having one boss that you're responsible to having 9, all of them with unique perspectives and backgrounds. And we have a chair, and the chair is very effective at helping kind of bring that to a point, decision-making to a point. But I had to learn how to balance that, how to handle my communication. I went on an outside board here 3 years ago. That was very helpful for me, an outside public company.
Which company?
Was Sealed Air Corporation. Mm-hmm. And then ultimately, that gives you perspective to understand what the independent director is going through and what they need. And so it made me a more effective CEO, because I could go back and talk with my team. It's like, listen, this is how we have to frame these discussions, because they're looking at it through this lens. We need to make sure they have this information. Here's why they need it, because they're representing the independent shareholder in the room. And so I think you grow. I'm one of these people, having grown up playing competitive athletics, I view that every year I've got to get better. The board of directors has every right to expect that in year 9, I'll be better CEO than I was in year 2. So it's a constant learning process, and you just really need to embrace that.
Talking about great batters in the box, a lot of them will, after they go for BP, they'll go back into the locker room and watch video of what they were doing and talk with swing coaches, et cetera, and make adjustments. You were at Goldman yesterday. Will you go back to Atlanta and sort of listen to the tape and think about, I could have answered that question differently, or do you move on and next one up?
And we have people that listen, and then ultimately I'll listen to it as well. And talk about those great swing coaches. Sometimes they watch for a day and then they make one subtle comment around messaging in my case. And so I think, look, you've got to be willing to look at yourself and constantly be looking for ways to improve and make sure your message is landing right. And, if it's not, then think about how you may be able to do it differently next time.
You often describe talking about your vision for graphic packaging as a company that is running a different race. What does that term mean, and how has it shaped the company?
First off, we were able to kind of roll that out, a little plug for the NYSE here in September of 2019 at our investor day that we did. And we rolled out our Vision 2025, goals and objectives, which had 4 main pillars. And we can get into that a little bit later on. But what we want to do is really run a unique business model that reinforces itself. I mean, if you think about strategy, everything you do needs to reinforce that basic strategy that you put in place. And in our case, it's around driving innovation, for end-use customers that, create lift in the marketplace for their products, a relentless focus on cost reduction, and then spectacular, capital allocation. And we think we've been able to do all those things as part of our Vision 2025.
You talked about Kalamazoo earlier and those first visits to the James River plant. You announced early in your tenure that you're making a $600 million investment back in your old college stomping grounds of Kalamazoo. Can you talk about what K2 is and what it's done for the business?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks for bringing that up. Kalamazoo is an interesting town when you think about the fact that in 1950, 50% of all the residents in that town somehow worked for the paper industry. That number today, because of changes in terms of overall product demands and paper grades, is down to about 2%. And most of those folks work for our company. So we're proud of that. And it was a nice moment for me to be able to go back for all the right reasons and make that announcement that we were going to spend what ultimately turned out to be $700 million and to build a brand new paper machine, the first of its kind in over 30 years, back into the city of Kalamazoo at our mill there. We operate 3 paper machines in Kalamazoo. We make 1 million tons of coated recycled paperboard a day, which means there's 1 million tons, a little more than 1 million tons of what otherwise would be garbage that we're cleaning up and turning back into primary packaging. So it might have started as a paper cup. The next time you see it, it's going to be a cereal box. So primary product, we can recycle the fibers up to 6 to 7 times with the technology that we've got there, clean it all up. It's just a really good, ESG story.
Whether it's automobiles, automobile parts, think about any other industry and certainly into paper, the way that a mill or a plant would dominate the local workforce, whether it's Kalamazoo or Toledo or Detroit, over the course of decades in the 20th century leading into the 21st. What has been the trajectory of human labor needs versus technology to run a good paper plant versus some other industries, and people thinking, I can have a long-term job at the Kalamazoo plant?
That's one of the things we're really proud of. I mean, we've got a machine in Kalamazoo that's 100 years old. The side frames are 100 years old. It's been modernized with drives and equipment, but the basic technology hasn't changed that much. What the K2 machine does for us, Kalamazoo number 2, we have number 1 and number 3. We have to number them that way or no one knows where to go. We've got scale. So when you walk out on the floor, for a $700 million investment, you don't see any people. It's very automated. And I like to say that we're taking younger people that 6 years ago were on their parents' couch playing Call of Duty, and now they're in our control room operating a very technologically sophisticated paper machine. And if we look at those folks and we were to move them over to that machine that's 100 years old, they'd have no interest in doing that job. And then if you looked at the demographic of the people running the K3 machine, the older machine is roughly 70 years old, they have no interest in running the new machine. So you got to bring the work to the folks where they ultimately want to be, and we think we're doing that with the investments that we're making.
Last year, talking about the various uses for the New York Stock Exchange building, we hosted the folks involved in the college football kickoff, ringing the opening bell, presented by Chick-fil-A. I want to dive a little deeper into this project that you're doing with them. A double wall fiber-based cup that Chick-fil-A is using to serve drinks without that annoying condensation that you get sort of when you get a cup of coffee. Can you talk about the development process for the product and the potential impact that it might have on the industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So historically, a lot of cold and hot cups have been made out of the polystyrene resin. It's a very cost-effective resin, and it's got excellent thermodynamic capabilities. The only problem with it is once it's cracked, it stays in our planet for almost 400 years. So not great from an ESG standpoint. So many municipalities and states are banning that resin from being able to be used in primary packaging. And so it creates an opportunity that these customers are ultimately having to find a new solution for their beverage platform. You saw it with Dunkin' Donuts. They made the transition out of foam and into paperboard, our paperboard cups a number of years ago. Now we have Chick-fil-A that is actively working with us. And that condensation point, if you think about where a lot of those stores are, they tend to be in the U.S. South. There's large, cups of sweet tea and other things that they sell to their customers, and they don't want that making a mess or being a bad experience for their customer. And so it's very important they find something that works very well for them. So we've been very maniacally focused along with them trying to find a solution that does that. And the one that they're testing now at 10% of their stores across the U.S. is got some unique intellectual property where it's a double wall and there's barriers in between air, if you will, the 2 layers of paperboard that allows that thermal property to work where you don't get that condensation. So we're very encouraged in the early testing, and I'm sure there'll be some tweaks as we continue to go along, but we're very focused on driving that to a successful conclusion.
How do you see consumer trends in the food and beverage industry evolving, and how is graphic packaging adapting to meet the changing consumer preferences?
Well, it's just really rewarding for me, as I alluded to earlier, having been in the business now for over 30 years. The embrace that the end-use consumer and the education the end-use consumer is having now around making selections on products that actually are much more sustainable and recyclable. In some cases, these are a little more money. If you think about our KeoClip that we're doing for cans, that's replacing the rings, the plastic rings that no one's liked forever.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was around when I was a kid, pictures of fish and turtles and other things.
I still get scolded in the house and cut them apart.
Yeah, exactly. And ultimately, the paperboard solution that we announced a couple of years back and now have sold over 50 machines, a lot in Europe and now here in the U.S. market as well. It's made out of 100% recycled fiber. The merchandising capabilities are fantastic. The marketeers love this because they can put, the company's name on it. And we've got technology that orients the cans perfectly where the labels are indexed out so they can get that brand appeal on the shelf. But it's probably another penny a package if you think about it that way versus the existing state. And so, you understand why customers make the decisions that they do because they're under a lot of pressure. Their margins are under pressure. But again, it's that end-use consumer that's pushing them to say, look, we're going to select things that ultimately we feel are going to be more sustainable. And that's causing some of that change. And it's rewarding for someone that's made a career out of packaging. And yet on the other side of things, we've got to continue to innovate. We've got to continue to drive our costs down. And that's why, Josh, you've seen us spending so much money into our manufacturing platform to make sure that we're working both sides of that equation.
Talking about working both sides of the equation, we were all here, it wasn't too long ago, during the pandemic, the spike in lumber prices and the slowdown in the supply chain a couple of years ago. Both must have impacted the company's ability to both produce and deliver products. Your customers are expecting the pallets of packaging to arrive on time at the plant so that they can fill them with both the dry and wet goods that you're making them for. Can you talk about your outlook for how you manage that and how pricing might be affected going forward?
Yeah, so maybe just a little bit of a positive, shout out to our 25,000 men and women around the globe that during the pandemic were truly essential frontline workers. We have large market share in the food and beverage segment, as I alluded to earlier in the podcast here. There were no work from home days for those folks. They were running the mills, they were running the converting plants, they were making sure that our customers had packaging that could be used because they were responsible for helping make sure that everybody stayed fed during the pandemic. So I couldn't be more proud of them grinding through that. Was not easy, as you well know. And then in early 2021, when Winter Storm Uri hit, it lit a long tail fuse, as you've alluded to, on inflation. The dislocation of a lot of these commodities that for the first time in my career, we just didn't know if we could get certain things we needed to manufacture, the end-use products that we ultimately need to have. And we were having to substitute and find different things and ship it in and pay more money. And the inflation over a 2-year period of time was well over $600 million for our company, which is a big number, given the size COG base that we have. And so we're now to the point where we're actually in a little bit more normalized state where we're not dealing with force majeure issues like we were for the year and a half that we struggled through all that. But I'm proud of how our team performed on that. I think when you look at our customers, we hear a lot more from them around security of supply than we ever heard before. I still expect them to be very aggressive in their purchasing methodologies. It's their job. But having a supplier like Graphic Packaging that's investing behind the business and ultimately making sure that they can service their brands, because a stock outage for them, that's a big deal. I mean, if you can't get the product that you always buy and you try something else and you like it, the terminal value of those cash flows over a multi-year period of time is massive. And their marketeers know that, and so do their CEOs. And so that's why the focus is so high on making sure that you don't have any stock outages.
After the break, Michael Doss, the president and CEO of Graphic Packaging Holding Company, and I are going to talk about the company's growth projections and their ESG goals in the coming years. That's all coming up right after this.
Connecting the opportunity is just part of the hustle.
Opportunity is using data to create a competitive advantage.
It's raising capital to help companies change the world.
It's making complicated financial concepts seem simple.
Opportunity is making the dream of home ownership a reality.
Writing new rules and redefining the game.
And driving the world forward to a greener energy future.
Opportunity is setting a goal
and charting a course to get there.
Sometimes the only thing standing between you and opportunity is someone who can make the connection.
At ICE, we connect people to opportunity.
Welcome back. Before the break, I was talking to Michael Doss, the president and CEO of Graphic Packaging Holding Company, about the development of the company over his 33 years with the business. Mike, in 2020, Graphic Packaging set internal goals for its ESG efforts under what you called your Vision 25. You mentioned it earlier. Can you share more detail on the plan to achieve those goals and what impact it's going to have and has had on your operations?
Yeah. So again, we use a large amount of raw materials to make our products. Even though they're 100% recyclable and start with trees, any project that we use or can do that ultimately results in using less material is a good project for us. And so when you look at what we're doing in Kalamazoo, the startup of that machine, we've reduced our carbon footprint and greenhouse gas emissions by roughly 10% across the overall platform. And we've done that because everything's modern on the machine. So these are big numbers. And the only way you can do that type of thing is by making large scale capital investments like we're doing. You're not going to get to the goals you put in place by just relamping with LED lights. You should do that, but it requires scale, it requires capital. And again, that's the type of supplier we want to be for our customers. And our customers are ultimately putting very large, ambitious goals out there. You've had some guests talk about becoming carbon neutral by certain dates. We're part of that answer, but the only way we're able to do that on scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions that are there for us and for our customers is by investing in modern technology that's just a lot cleaner and better for the planet.
My colleagues over at ICE's sustainable finance business have been discussing at length a big piece that appeared in the Wall Street Journal recently by Ryan December about recasting the lumber industry as a source for carbon capture and creating carbon credits. Do you have any thoughts on that piece and how adding that aspect to the pulp industry could be a multiplier for your recycling efforts?
Yeah, look, I think the U.S. forests, in particular North America, are some of the best carbon sink assets the planet has. And how we use those and how we manage those, because they need to be actively managed, is really important. Ryan wrote about that, and it's through the lens of lumber. But pulpwood's also important, and we play a vital role in that in our industry because we are not taking down the mature trees. We're taking down the thinnings, the culls, because we only want the pulp. And then we clear those out and then ultimately let the landowner bring the good trees to full maturity, and they're used for a higher commercial content, like lumber. So it really complements each other quite well. And it's important that we're planting in the neighborhood of 3 or 4 trees for every one that's harvested, because for us, it's like a crop. And ultimately, we need to have that material to have a sustainable business.
Does pulp need to start with the living tree, or can you harvest sort of tree floor and things like that?
When it comes from a tree, it's from the actual fiber. There are some applications for grasses and wheat fiber. We don't use any of those, but there's experimentation going on with nanotechnologies and different things like that ultimately may prove to be beneficial. But for now, it's about pulp. And the neat thing is about that, Josh, is if you think about starting with a tree, by definition, a 100% renewable resource, we harvest it and turn it into a primary package like a cup or a soft drink or beer carrier in its virgin format. we can recapture that package, as I mentioned, and recycle it 6 to 8 times through our recycling operations. And then ultimately the end of life is very responsible because it'll just go, it can be composted and back to its natural organic state. And so a lot of people talk about a circular economy. Our industry is really driving a circular economy, and we're living in the intersection of that. And that's why we're investing so heavily back into recycling to make sure that we can clean up increasingly more dirty fiber as all of us throw all our stuff into a single stream recycling can and say, woo, did my part. But believe it or not, that's probably not the best way to commingle everything together because it creates some contamination.
Where will a consumer end up using that piece of fiber that's on its 8th life? What kind of forms does that take?
If it's on its 8th life, it's probably not going to be too commercially capable for us because the fibers have been beat up so many times. They're not very long. They don't have any strength. But, like I said, the next time you see that paper cup, it's going to be in a cereal carton, a cake carton, a carrier carton, something like that.
A section of the article that Ryan wrote spoke about the speed of growth for trees, namely that the part of the country that your company is headquartered in can raise trees in a fraction of the time that it takes trees up in Windham, New York, where I have a place to root. How does Graphic Packaging source its trees? And once they convert them to pulp, how many times can your process be used to recycle materials?
What Ryan was speaking to is the loblolly pine that's indigenous to the areas around our Macon and Augusta facilities in Georgia, as well as our West Monroe and Texarkana facilities in Louisiana and Texas, respectively. Those trees basically come to full maturity in under 30 years now. I like to joke, on a warm summer night, you can practically roll down the window on the car and hear them growing. I mean, they grow very fast.
Is that natural or through hybridization?
Both. So it's a combination, and we source all our fiber through sustainably certified forests. I actually, as you alluded to in my bio, sit on the board of SFI, the Sustainable Forestry Initiative, making sure that we plant and harvest fiber, in a very ethical and responsible way is really important.
Speaking of the goals that you got, the Green New Deal and other proposed and passed government regulations coming into effect globally to reduce climate change call for 100% recyclable or reusable packaging. How does the incoming regulation impact your TAM calculations?
Yeah, it informs it in a big way. It's really, and that's why it's grown. Our original Vision 2025, we had a TAM of about $6 billion, and now it's up to $12.5 billion. And it's really all around counting up those types of products around the margin where we believe fiber-based packaging can replace single-use plastics.
You've said, I'm going to quote you here, we're not looking for perfection. We're looking for progress in sustainability. With so much plastic and with the power of rigid boxes, there's an opportunity for plastic needs to dissipate. And we talked about plastic a lot on the show. What sets your company apart from competitors in terms of sustainable packaging innovation?
We really focus on making incremental progress here because, you see, and just to use a metaphor, I'd rather have 80% of something than 100% of nothing. And people sometimes spend so much time working on that perfection. And I admire that. I mean, I think that's really good. But there are real issues we've got to deal with now. And if we can be incrementally better and make progress or move the puck, to use a hockey term here, as we were talking at the break, ultimately that's what we do at Graphic, I think, better than most. And
bring us into your R&D office. If I walk in the door, what do I find? People in lab coats? Do you spend a lot of time with them?
We do, and I do. Ultimately, if you walked into one of those labs, you'd see a whole bunch of test equipment. We've got small paper machines that we can try different types of coatings on. We've got microwaves where we can heat the material that we're using for plastic. We've got dispensers that dispense drinks. We've got store shelves that replicate what you'd find at a Costco or a Walmart, so our customers can see what their products would look like on the shelf. We've got the ability to print packages and replicate them the day our customers are there, so they can take these samples back and just miraculously show up on their executives' desks so that they can see what it would look like. So we spend a lot of time making sure that we're looking at both the application and the science behind the packaging, as well as how we decorate the package. And the decoration is really important. As I mentioned, I've been in the industry for over 3 decades, and I'm old enough to remember when there were 3 primary channels. Now at my house, shamefully, I think I get 2,000 channels that I can choose from. And of course, on our cell phone, our younger people get most of their news in their digital marketing. My daughter actually is in that industry, so I've learned a little bit about it. So if you're trying to build a brand with multimedia explosion like has happened, it's really difficult. So the average consumer goes into that store, they know they're going to buy bread, eggs, and milk. Everything else is kind of an adventure. And so they're going up and down the store shelves. And does that product catch the eye of the consumer? Because if it does, it very well may wind up in the cart. And so that point of purchase is really important. So we spend a lot of time making sure that our printing and the quality of our paperboard is top notch so that it really stands out and pops on the shelf.
Talk about the decision-making and financial process you go through in a table like this with your CFO here, your head of marketing there, to decide whether, hey, the people in the lab have come up with this innovation. CFO, how much can we spend on a new production line? And head of marketing, can you do some focus groups with consumers to sort of determine whether its appeal is going to be there?
I'll give you a real life example on our paper seal product, which is replacing polystyrene foam trays that still have a plastic overwrap, and it's for protein packages and vegetable packages. So this is a great example of progress. It's still not perfect, but your ability to pull that paper or the plastic away from the paper and then recycle the paper is far superior to the current set that's using a foam tray. I thought when that was first framed to us, because there's a special machine that has to be used to do it, that this was what I'll refer to as a boom splat. Something that was going to be, kind of neat and then wouldn't go anywhere. To my chagrin here, much to my chagrin, ultimately that product's really taken off. I was talking to our president of our EMEA business over in Europe. He was at Interpack all week. Customers are just really responding to that technology in a big way. So the marketing folks made that pitch. We knew what it was going to cost. Our CFO, Steve Sugar, ultimately was able to find a way to fund it and free up some CapEx that allowed us to do that. And we made some bets and they're paying off. So I think you've got to be willing to listen, ask tough questions, and ultimately, our folks that are running those businesses are closer to them than even I am. I'm hiring them to drive those businesses and drive the growth and deliver both the top and bottom line. So I've got to be willing to make some bets. And sometimes, they do it in a way that I wouldn't do it. And this is kind of the evolution of me in my 8th year versus me in my 1st year. I've come to realize that, giving them that latitude is actually quite good. And it doesn't always turn out the way that I would have wanted it to turn out. But if they make the progress they need to and hit the objective, the organization's stronger. And, we have to build managers that are capable of making those types of bets and risks, because we can't run the company of our size from the headquarters in Atlanta. That'd be foolish to think we could do it that way. So empowering our business units to be able to go out and hit the objectives we put out there broadly as part of our Vision 2025 has been a key part of our success, and will continue to be the approach we use to run the company.
I keep a running list of trade shows that I want to go to around the world. Should I put Interpack on the list?
Yeah, I think that's a great one. Again, the trade shows in Europe tend to be the ones that are most heavily attended. You're going to see the newest materials out there. They've got the big messes that, convention centers that, rival and exceed, McCormick Place in Chicago.
So sustainability, Mike, just a part of the ESG process for graphic packaging. With operations across the globe, you have to have a diverse workforce. How does diversity contribute to the success of the company, and what steps are you taking to promote more of a culture of inclusivity?
Yeah, so it's an important part of us. If you think about the markets that we service and how the food is bought, whether it's QSR or food service or just our traditional food and beverage business, we've got a wide range of families and family formation that ultimately make those decisions. So having a more diverse group that brings an opinion and helps us understand how those purchasing decisions are made ultimately helps us resonate with the products that we ultimately supply our customers.
Can you talk about the job opportunities that are opening up? $1 billion plant in Waco will have in the local area, not just in the number of middle-class jobs, but also the ability to support the local industry. We've done a couple shows of the migration of industry from Northeast, Midwest, down to Southeast in Texas.
Yeah, so you asked a question about pulp, the indigenous trees, the loblolly pine that are close to our virgin mills. When you make recycled paperboard, you want to be where the people are. So if you think about Kalamazoo, Michigan, it is almost halfway between Detroit and Chicago. So great basket to collect fiber in. Same thing with Waco. So we're going to spend $1 billion down there. We're going to build a sister machine to the one we just got done building, but it's going to be a brand new mill. So there's a little bit more money that we have to spend. We got to put a wastewater treatment plant in. We're putting increased pulping and cleaning capabilities because we want to be able to take up to 15 million cups a day and turn it back into primary packaging. So more investment that's going on there. Ultimately, we'll hire in the neighborhood of 240 people, both hourly and salaried, that would go into that. We'll employ the better part of 2,000 contractors for about 2.5 years to do all that. So it's a huge impact, for the Waco area. And why Waco? Well, you've got if you look at Dallas to the north and you look at Houston to the southeast and then San Antonio to the southwest and you draw a triangle around that, you've got roughly 20 million people that are generating, products that need to be recycled. And right now there's really no major producer of paperboard or containerboard in that area. So it's a great fiber basket for us. There's a lot of military bases in that area, as you know, and we hire a lot of folks that transition out of military into manufacturing. And we find that those folks do extremely well in our environment. They're very sensitized to safety and running big equipment, and so they fit in really well with us. And Waco's a nice town. I mean, you look at it, it's a little over 100,000 people, got a great university there. Maybe I'm a little biased. My son-in-law went to school at Baylor, but it's one of those areas where we felt that we could build a good leadership team.
Live in New York City. We've got at the bottom of our apartment building a trash bin and a recycle bin. And New York City sort of says put everything you got that's potentially recyclable, your tin foil, your little plastic lids, your plastic, all your paper products in this big thing and leave it to us. We will sort it and get it where it needs to be. And then some municipalities have no recycling process. And some consumers have different mindsets than other consumers and throw all of it into the trash, no matter how recyclable it is. What do you see between governments and also consumer behavior in terms of getting the message and sorting this stuff and getting you the pulp and the paper products that you need to put it back into use?
There's a lot there. If I just kind of break it apart for a minute, single stream recycling is better than no recycling at all. As I mentioned earlier, it does come with its limitations because when you commingle everything, it's just hard to separate it and get commercial value out of it. If you look at more developed areas of recycling, like Europe, for example, there's in the neighborhood of probably four streams coming out of every household and business. It's going to take us a while to get there based on the mindset, of the American consumer. We live in a great country. As I like to say at times, in some ways we've got an embarrassment of riches. And so we haven't had to be as focused on, recovering and recycling everything as they are in Japan, where everything's got to be shipped into the island because they don't have a lot of those natural resources like we do. So if you go to Japan and you go to a QSR restaurant, everything is separated and it's going to go back and be used again and recycled. It's part of the culture. I think a lot of that comes with education. I am not a real believer in incentives, financial incentives or government regulation to do that. I think people ultimately, when they understand what happens in the commercial value you can get out of that stuff, that you can make progress on it. And that's what we're trying to do in Waco. We're going to have to work with our customers, our QSR customers, to get those cups, probably have a third-party business that captures them and then gets them back to our facility. We're willing to pay for that because it's valuable fiber for us. And there's been exchanges for those fiber markets, for over 100 years. And so there's an infrastructure that's already there. We just need to expand upon it. Companies like Graphic Packaging need to spend the money so we've got the cleaning capabilities to clean it up. And then there's, look, if there's anything you don't want to do is bet against the creativity of the American entrepreneur because they tend to, figure that stuff out every time.
Is there any guidance you want to leave our listeners with, any consumer guidance you want to leave our listeners with about their own behaviors to say, you put the plastic and the paper commingled together in the same thing, but heads up, consumer, that plastic has a very tough journey to reuse.
Yeah, I think the big thing I'd say is just right now, if all you have is single stream, just make sure you're not putting legitimate trash in there because that's difficult for the municipal recycling facilities to deal with. They're putting robots and things in there. They'll get better. Again, it's a natural evolution, but if we can avoid putting trash in the recycling bins, that's really helpful.
The Waco facility that you opened is, as you said, going to replace a number of recycled fiber mills while increasing your output capabilities. You mentioned it is sort of the second outgrowth of what you've done in Kalamazoo. What are the lessons learned from that build out and successes and failures in Kalamazoo that you sort of brought to your learning in Waco?
So we did a lot of things right in Kalamazoo, and that's part of the reason we're so aggressive at moving so quickly to make another big investment in Waco. But if I was to point out a few things that we learned really in the construction process, it's around making sure that your engineering drawings are darn close to 100% done. And that's seems like it's intuitively obvious, but most people, when they start building big projects, are maybe 60 to 70% of the way done, and they're finishing those up on the fly. And ultimately, that creates, in some cases, some rework. The other thing that we're doing in Waco that we didn't do in Kalamazoo is we're not going to do what's called stacking the trades. Because when you stack the trades, you've got the mechanics and the electricians, trying to work in synchronicity. It sounds really good, but in practicality, they tend to get in each other's way. They need the same cranes, those types of things. So we actually gave our engineering group an extra 6 months to build out Waco, so we didn't have to do that. And we're doing a lot less overtime as a result of that. Our drawings are 100% done because we're building the same machine that we have in Kalamazoo down in Waco, not making really any changes at all. So I think being able to capture those types of things and integrate it into your planning process is a big deal. It saves you money and you have a better startup.
That mill in Waco is going to be able to produce CRB at a cost on par with Kalamazoo's most efficient machine, coming in at, I think, less than $405 a ton. Reduced cost is good, Mike, but even better if paired with increased demand. Are you bullish on the potential growth in the coming years in demand for your products, both producing and converting?
The other thing I'd say is that the quality coming off the machine is superior to anything else other than the machine we have in Kalamazoo. And for the reasons I mentioned around, market pop or shelf pop, it's really important that we've got that. But yeah, I think, look, the demand for recycled product, you're going to see coated recycled paperboard in more places. We're going to be able to penetrate different parts of the market with different grades that we're going to be able to create. We announced a new one on our last earnings call called Rainier that's got, the appearance characteristics of an SBS sheet, which is the virgin sheet, that comes from virgin pulp at a price that's a couple $100 a ton cheaper. So customers are always looking for ways to save money, but they don't want to sacrifice the appearance of their product. And so that's kind of on us to innovate and find ways to do it with recycled material. And we're going to have the capability to do that.
As we wrap up our conversation, we've been on this long journey of your life that started with that trip to the plant that had the James River sign on top of it. And over the 30 years since, graphic packaging has evolved a lot, both through organic and acquisition. As you look toward the future, Mike, what do you and your M&A folks look for in terms of things that you think you need to buy to make the company progress even more?
Well, the first thing we'll always do is to go through the lens of our operating model, which what we're really good at is fiber-based packaging. And our focus has been consumer fiber-based packaging, as you've asked about here in the podcast. So we need to make sure that we don't try to do something that we're not. I think, a lot of companies do that, and it doesn't work out really well for them. So we'll stick to our knitting, as they say. And the good news for us is we've got a growing market. We've got very nice market share in North America. We've got growing market share in Europe. We've got innovation that's driving that demand that I talked about. We're investing heavily back into our business. If you want to work in our industry, we're a great place to work because we're investing $1 billion in a brand new mill. For many of those younger employees that'll work on that project, it's probably the only one they'll do in their entire career. So we actually have 7 different younger, what we call leadership development people that are working for our core engineers that are doing that build out because we want them to get that experience and ultimately have that knowledge. So it's a neat time to be part of our company. As I mentioned, recycling is kind of in vogue now. The awesome part for us is we're able to invest big money and get returns on those projects. So it's a great story.
For the next CEO of graphic packaging, whenever that may come, what is the world of packaging you think that they are going to steward the company through? Where do you see this business, this industry in 5-10 years?
Yeah, I think it's just going to be more acceleration of the trends we see now. You're going to see more sustainability focus. You're going to see more real effort on ESG because it's real. And the end-use consumers I've alluded to over the last 5 years is really advocating for that. And they do so with their purchasing dollars, which of course gets everybody's attention, right? And so we're at the intersection of that. And I think for the next leadership team and ultimately the CEO, they'll have a piece of white canvas like I did that they'll figure out how to build it out over time. I mean, it was a $4 billion business when I became CEO. Now we'll do $10 billion this year. I've got every belief that this company's got the potential to be $20 billion over that time frame, which is really, really exciting.
Thanks so much for joining us inside the ISS.
My pleasure. Great to be with you, Josh.
That's our conversation for this week. Our guest was Michael Doss, the president and CEO of Graphic Packaging Holding Company. That's NYSE ticker symbol GPK. If you like what you heard, please rate us on iTunes so other folks know where to find us. And if you've got a comment or a question you'd like one of our experts to tackle on a future show or hear from our listed company CEOs like Mike, email us at icehouse@ice.com or tweet at us at icehousepodcast. Our show is produced by Pete Ash with production assistance, editing, and engineering from Ian Wolfe. I'm Josh King, your host, signing off from the library of the New York Stock Exchange. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next week.
Information contained in this podcast was obtained in part from publicly available sources and not independently verified. Neither ICE nor its affiliates make any representations or warranties, express or implied, as to the accuracy or completeness of the information and do not sponsor, approve, or endorse any of the content herein, all of which is presented solely for informational and educational purposes. Nothing herein constitutes an offer to sell, a solicitation of an offer to buy any security, or a recommendation of any security or trading practice. Some portions of the preceding conversation may have been edited for the purpose of length or clarity.